This tutorial will help you to use the Pythagorean theorem in a manipulated form. So you remember from our previous lesson that the Pythagorean theorem is leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. Now, if I give you some of the information about a right triangle, like say the lengths of the two sides, then each time when we substituted these values in, we still had to manipulate this problem, meaning we had to compute the squares, then we had to add the squares together, and then we had to square root our values. So what we're going to do today is we're going to manipulate the formula from the beginning so that we can enter it into our calculator just one time. And that means that if I want to find out what a hypotenuse is, let's say, which is the letter C, I would remove this power, right, the power of 2, by rooting that. Since it's a square, this is called the square root. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. And by doing that, I can create a single math sentence, which gives me my exact solution now. And since I manipulated the formula, once I fill in these values, that's the only thing I'll need to type in my calculator. The second day of our lesson, we were looking for a missing leg. Now, if I'm looking for a missing leg, say the letter B, then square rooting both sides will still not get B by itself. So we had to manipulate this formula a bit by subtracting a term from both sides. Once we did that, we were able to isolate that missing leg. Now, it doesn't matter if you isolate B or A, but you do have to get this, you do have to get that power of 2 to disappear. Do you remember how you do that? That's right, you square root it. That will eliminate the square sign and give you a single sentence that you can enter in your calculator. Now notice this time it has a minus sign in it. So if you hadn't had a chance to write down some of these formulas, now would be a good time to pause the video and write them down. Here are those two formulas now. All right. Hopefully you paused the video and wrote them down so you can reference them. You need to first determine, are you looking for a hypotenuse or are you looking for a leg? So don't forget, the legs are the two sides that form the 90-degree angle, and the hypotenuse is the longest diagonal side across from the 90-degree angle. So the first thing I always recommend, if you're looking for a hypotenuse or even if you're looking for a leg, is that you always label your sides by starting first with the hypotenuse. Because if you label that correctly, the other two can't be wrong. You can have A and B in this configuration, or you can have A and B in that configuration. It doesn't matter, as long as your C is labeled appropriately. Now, we're looking to find a hypotenuse, so that's an addition problem. We square and add together the two legs that we know, and when we square root it, we will get that missing hypotenuse. So the only thing I need to type into my calculator is a really big square root sign, an 8 squared and a 12 squared underneath, and that will give me that missing side length. So let's use that Desmos Scientific Calculator now. So look at your numbers, 8 squared plus 12 squared. So square root of 8 squared plus 12 squared. And if you get a decimal, you round to nearest tenth. So 14.4. So the value of the hypotenuse is 14.4, and you're done. You don't need to manipulate the equation or solve it piece by piece because we manipulated the formula. So that's how you find a missing hypotenuse. Now let's practice the subtraction formula. How do you find a missing leg? Now again, the first thing you should do is label your hypotenuse. The other two don't matter. So anytime you're missing a leg, you're going to have a subtraction problem. and the hypotenuse should be first. Now it doesn't matter which letters go inside here. Just make sure that it matches the letters you've labeled in your problem there. So all I need to do is enter into my calculator a big square root sign, a 15 squared minus a 6 squared, and I'll get that missing side. So let's go do that now. Square root 15 squared minus 6 squared. Was that it? 6 squared? Yep. And I get 13.7. So the missing leg is 13.7. And you're done. So don't forget, there are two formulas, and you need to choose the appropriate one. Now, a squared plus b squared equals c squared always works, but when I manipulate it to show the square roots at the beginning, it's less work for you to type in your calculator. All right, let's take a look. Do you know which formula we should be using here? First, label your sides. If you're missing a leg, that's a subtraction problem. Always put your hypotenuse first because it's the largest number. Type this into your Desmos calculator. Square root of 25 squared minus 7 squared. Well, that's a nice number. So the missing leg is 24 centimeters. Let's take a look at another one. What are we looking for this time? Label your parts and fill them in. If you have both A and B, then that means you get to add them. So we're going to enter the square root of 10 squared plus 8 squared, and that will give us our hypotenuse. Square root of 10 squared plus 8 squared equals 12.8. Our hypotenuse is 12.8. All right, one more. Which formula do you think you should use? Label your sides. And if you're missing a leg, you subtract. So we need a large square root sign with a 13 squared minus 5 squared. And that will give us our answer. 13 squared minus 5 squared. Make sure all of your values are underneath that big, long square root sign. All right, we got a nice answer this time, 12. Sometimes you get integers, and sometimes you don't. All right, it's time for you to try some on your own. Pause the video and give these a try. All right, let's check and see how you did. Did you pause the video? Solve them. I mean it. All right, the first one, I got a decimal. The second one, I got a whole number. And that concludes the lesson on how to use a manipulated Pythagorean theorem formula.